I knew about Promare from the fan art on Twitter, and I'd seen the poster and a bit of the teaser trailers, but I didn't know anything about the plot. So when I went to watch it, absolutely everything was a surprise. And newsflash, it's been 2 months, and I can't stop thinking about it. My very first takeaway on a basic level was, are you a Devilman fan, but tired of being sad? Then you'll probably enjoy Promare. I just know that I personally am a Devilman fan, tired of being sad, so this was perfect because it hits a lot of my emotional drama tastes, but in a more fun and optimistic way rather than like a cathartic tragedy way. A non spoiler take on the movie is while it's fairly predictable and expected in some ways, it's also one of those pieces of media where you could know every single thing that is going to happen and still come away feeling like it punched you in the face because it's just wild. I've seen it 3 times by now, and every time it's like being punched in the face. That's like what I just said. It's just really great. It's a great theater experience, and I hope that more people will get to watch it, and it'll be available in other countries. It's frenetic and full of action and bright colors and nonstop movement, but I was also very pleasantly surprised at its tender and sweet moments as well. So, on to talking a bit more about the plot, including spoilers from here on out. First of all, remember Venom from 2018? The latter half of the movie was basically Venom, but if Venom was actually good. You have a sleek billionaire who's trying to escape a dying planet using alien power gained from experimenting on marginalized humans, and a dumbass protagonist with a heart of gold who forms an unlikely connection with a character first presented as an enemy, and part of their development is that they have to form a mental bond to defeat their opponents. I read a review for Promare shortly after watching it for the first time that kind of boiled it down to Gallo Themos is the stupidest protagonist ever. The story is predictable but funny, with the pretty visuals and punchy action being the best part. And everyone has a right to their opinion, but that made me kind of sad. I already talked about the predictability of the plot, and I'm not here to argue that Promare is the deepest piece of media ever, but it does have major themes that, while maybe addressed in clunky ways, are very clear and hard to miss. And speaking of clunky ways, it does do that fantasy discrimination thing that is just kind of weird for the usual reasons. If you've seen criticism of like Zootopia and X-Men and the like, you probably have an idea of what I mean. Like basically the whole thing of if there's an oppressed group, but then they have like superpowers that actually make them a threat, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of how oppression works. I was personally not too bothered by it in this case because Promare's world building was already kind of hand wavy, and the focus, where the strengths of the movie were more on how the main characters react to the events rather than the logistics of how everything works. But that was definitely a flaw that I saw in the movie. By the way, when I first watched it, I knew it was going to be zany and it was going to have bombastic plot twists because it was like a mecha fighting anime thing. But I didn't expect that it was going to be an apocalyptic kind of story, which is why I referenced Devilman in the first place, because every time I see an apocalyptic story in anime, I'm like, oh man, is this Devilman again? Yeah, and I also did not know that aliens were going to be involved, so it was really a double punch, because I thought it was just going to be about mecha firefighters fighting mecha fire people, but instead it's about saving the world from destruction, which in retrospect I probably should have seen coming, but yeah. And also, I can't believe the ending was basically that part in Hetalia where America's plan to stop global warming is building a giant mech to defend the Earth. And it's presented as like, oh man, that's a stupid plan. But in this case, that's actually what happened, and it was taken seriously. And what really amazes me is that all the elements in the movie could have easily turned into a darker and grittier story with harrowing points to make about the human condition, like lots of other series that have existed. But even though it does have intense, serious moments and it has really big stakes, it never loses that sense of style and fun. And the characters are a big part of why that works. Now, about the characters. Alright, Gallo. I guess this is the first time when watching this movie that I finally understood the term himbo. that I've been seeing around. I was just watching it and being like, oh, this is what it means. This is what a himbo is. So, yeah, he's just a sweetie. He's a dummy. He's a dork. He brought a PowerPoint presentation on the history of his weapon to his first fight. Like, that's adorable. And yeah, my first impression of him was that I liked his design. I respect the choice to have equality by having the main male character be somehow even less dressed than the female characters who are already only wearing like crop tops or like bralettes. Yeah, which is already I'm like, wow, that's a bold character design move. I respect that. Gallo really charmed me. I was very won over. He's pretty much your standard dumb of ass, heart of gold hero character who which never gets old. Like it's really sweet. It's nice to see. He just cares a lot about firefighting, and he says this to the camera in his very, and as I mentioned earlier, like in his very first fight in the movie, he even brings out a PowerPoint presentation explaining the history of traditional Japanese firefighting gear to his enemies, and it's just so dorky and ridiculous, and I love it. It has a lot of sincerity to him. Like I was afraid he was gonna be like a snarky, cynical, like wisecracking kind of guy, and he does wisecrack a couple times, but he's just really sweet, and I always love that in characters. And I would say that his aggressive anime optimism is a big reason why the story manages to stay so lighthearted in the first place, because as much of a dumbass as he is, we get to see him face actual challenges to his worldview, and he solves it by fighting and punching, but he also solves it by being observant and compassionate and doing his best to understand. And like, it's just really great to see characters go through that, especially when they go through that and they come out and they're triumphant, unlike in Devilman. Anyway, next we have Leo Fatia, the one everyone seems to have fallen for, including myself, because his entrance was absolutely perfection. Because he's just building a throne of fire to man spread on, in a sexy robot suit to look imperiously down on Gallo's dorky PowerPoint presentation. It was when I first watched this movie, this is when he just arrived on the scene, built his throne of fire, and it was just, I was thinking to myself, even if the rest of this movie sucks, this part alone was worth it. And luckily, the rest of the movie did not suck, and I got to see more of his character. But for real though, even when he's not in like his sexy robot suit, I just love the contrast between how elegant and feminine his aesthetic is, while also being an absolute beast. Like, even after Leo loses the first battle and he's captured and arrested, he's just very done with everything, and he's seen this all before. He's very unafraid, and it's just very admirable to see him be so strong, especially later because you see all the different things he and the other Burnish go through. Oh, also, there's a really funny and confusing part in the beginning where Leo and the Mad Burnish show up, and people are like, "Oh no, Gal, look out! There's the leader of the terrorist group we've been hunting for 30 years." And then it led to a lot of fans being really confused, like, is Leo actually 50 years old? And then it turns out, like, because of the sequel shorts, that actually, no, he just took over the role of Mad Burnish leader recently, and he's actually also a young guy, which I personally think is kind of a cop out. It's just a lot funnier to think that he's like a criminal for over 30 years, but still has a baby face, and I just think that would be really funny. But unfortunately, that isn't the canon. And Leo is a bit of a mystery because it doesn't really explain where he came from or why he's the leader, why he's the strongest, and I don't know, I would have loved for his story to be a bit more fleshed out, but I also kind of like that air of mystery and authority around him because you learn from all the other Burnish how they respect him a lot, and that he also is just he's a very respected leader, and he really cares for everyone, and you get to really see that even though you don't get to know his backstory. Like, you get a really good sense of the kind of person he is and how passionate, even though he looks very cold, he's very passionate about the well-being of the Burnish, and he's very admirable. Yeah, he's very opposite of Gallo, but when he's pushed to his limit, with all his anger and grief, he finally snaps, and it's really terrifying and amazing and cathartic to see. And I've also added him to my list of anime boys who exude Ryo Asuka Satan energy, because he fulfills a lot of the requirements. And you really can't go wrong with Ryo Asuka types of characters, because even if they share a lot of the same tropes, they usually end up being compelling characters in their own way. So I'm just really glad to add him to the team. Now we gotta talk about Gray Forsyth, I also thought he really reminded me of something when I first watched, and then I got home and I was like, oh my goodness, he's like that blonde dad from Dream Daddy in more ways than one. And I appreciate Craig because in the beginning, when Vulcan showed up, like the robot police suit guy, I was dismayed because I thought Vulcan was going to be the main villain. And I was like, oh man, because he seemed really boring. Like he was just like the usual shouty bad guy. But Cray felt like a really believable kind of evil, and that he's like a cunning opportunist who had an internalized hatred that manifests into a twisted savior complex. And I just think he was really cool since he got to be very creepy and reserved and constipated in his soul, as well as being completely unhinged and over the top. Like having at least one of those is fun, but having both is great. Yeah, so he was just a very, very good villain. He's a little predictable in some ways. Like you can tell he was evil from the start because it just had that suspicious feel. But the combination of his being like, oh, I have so much self control while he's going absolutely batshit wild, it was just wonderful to see. I love seeing characters who absolutely lose it and become more unhinged. It's like my favorite thing. And I also love how his character design is a good contrast to Gallo too. Since Gallo is very expressive and open and honest, he never hides what he's feeling or thinking, which is symbolized by him never wearing a shirt. While Cray, who always wears gloves and like this button up high collar shirt, he's putting every single ounce of his energy into like repressing his true nature and his hair. It's just nothing about this man is genuine, and it's great. Moving on to Harris and Ina Artabit. For minor characters, I was very pleased with how important they ended up being. I just think Ina was really sweet. She didn't get a whole lot of time in the movie, but I loved how she was someone who said she used to be insecure about Harris being a prodigy, but then she accepted it and herself. I feel like a lot of sibling stories have to do with jealousy a lot for drama, so it was nice that Ina's motivation towards Harris was about how she looked up to her and wanted to be proud of her, and Harris caring about Ina and being willing to do shady things for her. Like it just felt very mature and kind of like a nice approach to sibling relationships, and while still having like that angst factor. Also Stretch, but Harris just kind of really reminded me of Mikage from Revolutionary Girl Utena, which every time I just see a character who has pink hair and who's like a reserved science person and they're involved with human sacrifice, I'm just like, oh my god, it's Mikage. And actually, come to think of it, actually Kray's outfit looks a lot like Prince Dios's from Revolutionary Girl Utena as well, because it has that white, it's like that white suit with the cape with the red inside, and it has the gold and blue trim, and I just keep seeing these connections that aren't really there, but I love this comparison. I'm just really sad we didn't get to see Cray drive like a red car down the street and like do a flip over, but he wouldn't do a flip because unlike Akio, he would never open his shirt and be that emotional about it. Like that's what's the difference between them. That's a bit of a sidetrack. I was talking about Harris as Mikage, but overall, Harris and Ina, they're relatively simple characters. I would have liked to know a little bit more about their backstory because it's just like, oh, why do they care so much about each other? I mean, obviously they're siblings, but usually I like seeing why, like the specific reasons why. But it was nice that they both had their own goals and their reasons for doing things, and also like it's always a plus when the female characters in a story for me, like they don't revolve around the male characters as well. Like that's always a plus. And then there are the other characters, which really were not that major. They had fun designs, they're pretty supportive. I really like them, seeing them in fan art, but as far as in the movie themselves, they're pretty minimal, so I don't have a lot to say about them. And then, oh yeah, then there's Bayar's role, and her role was to stand next to Cray and be hot, which I'm not even complaining about. She looked great. She did a good job. Oh, and the best character, of course, was the unnamed pizza boy. Rest in pizza. But I'm happy because according to the directors, he didn't actually die. He just lost his arm, so post-canon, he's just living his pizza life with a prosthetic, which I know everything the creators say you gotta take with a grain of salt, but I'm gonna take it. I'm happy for him. I'm glad he's living his good pizza loving life and hopefully getting compensation from the government, but we'll see. And okay, let's not dance around it. Let's talk about the main thing about this movie, which isn't maybe the main thing, but let's talk about the shipping. Because you can't talk about Promare without talking about Leo Gallo because it is central to the entire movie. You might even call it the Nexus. And first of all, like I said earlier, I would pretty much not know this movie existed without all the delightful gay fan art. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I had no idea what the content of the movie was going to be. But seeing as we have that very gay forehead bump in the movie poster, I predicted that we would at least get some cool rival chemistry that would be fun to dig into, but maybe not more than that. However, I was completely unprepared for the tenderness, the emotion, the pathos, and just I'm just still trying to wrap my head around it. Like, it had everything I really wanted, because it's one thing to have a relationship dynamic where the rival leads are kind of jabbing at each other with some sexual tension, but this was some real heartfeltness. Like, it was soft in the lyrics of the music, the soft tune, the whole arc of Leo and Gallo's story about being two extremely different people coming together and acknowledging each other's hurt and understanding after facing betrayal and using the strength of that connection to face their common energy. Like, that's some good shit. Like, not only the saving each other's lives part, but remembering little details of what's important to each other. It's really sweet. And yeah, like when Leo goes berserk moment and Gallo is the one who has to fight him to save him. Like, it's just poetic classic anime. He recognizes his crying. Like, he's a good boy while Superfly is singing the, resurrect your lovely heart in the background. Like, that's some good shit. And then they pilot a mech together, which I'm not the most versed in mech stuff, but what I see around is that mech co-piloting is kind of like that classic code for relational synchronization and intimacy. And like Promare is a plot that moves very fast, so you can't really do a story in which characters slowly get to know each other and grow close with like that slow burn. But no, sometimes you gotta throw the boys straight from fighting into a frozen lake and then into the same mech together, and they can work it out. And they have a very short time to sell these characters good relationship, and it's really fast, but it's really intense, and it works. Because not only do they pilot a mech, but they combine their names, Leo de Galon, Gallo de Leon, and Leo enables Gallo's earnest silliness and uses his powers to help him out. It's really sweet. I'm very soft for it. And also, like, okay, we can't dance around this either. Like, there's the kiss. Call it CPR or whatever. Like, that was a kiss. Like, that scene lingered. It's like 14 entire seconds of just the camera lingering on this quiet, tender moment, which is a lot considering that 99% of this movie is the camera spinning around at ridiculous angles just because it can. And the fact that it's so still and so quiet really marks the scene as important to the plot and just important to the characters' emotional arcs. And like, while there's humor afterwards, and it's like, okay, like maybe it isn't like super confirmed or anything like that, and some people might be like, well, that's just baiting, but like, it doesn't make the fact that it's between two men the butt of a joke. Like, there's a joke, but it's not about it being gay. It's just about Gallo being way too into firefighting. And it's sweet, it's earnest, and even though, has that plot reasons excuse, it's done out of a deep understanding and care for each other, and that's what matters to me about it. And another fact that makes me die, but like in a good way, is how the Japanese fandom made the "Stay With Me" line from the dub trend, and then the promotional material for the Japanese 4D showing proceeded to use that line as well, and it just shows how important this is and how people just really latched onto it emotionally. And then immediately afterwards, it's like they're finally completely on the same page and get to stand shirtless in the court together and fuse their souls as they lead the Burnish and the Promares out of the universe by once again building a giant fire mech out of fire that sets the world on fire to get rid of the bad fire. And it's like, don't think too hard about the physics or logics of how this works, because this is about the emotions. It's about saving the world with the power of love and a giant heart-shaped explosion, which I thought I was imagining at first, but then I saw other people mention it as well, and they're like, man, yeah, I wasn't alone. I'm really glad. Anyways, it's really good. All the interactions from the first meeting to the end was just so good and just full of like a respect. Even when they're enemies, there was a respect and willingness to try and understand each other. And I always love seeing that with characters. So, my thoughts on the ending. Alright, I know I just like fangirled about the whole thing for the past few minutes, but I just trying to be critical. I'll say I had issues with the idea that the British are suddenly normal again. It felt like a kind of cop-out solution to the whole like how to solve oppression thing. Especially since like I don't know how much to read into this, but I felt like the British oppression seemed less like a clunky racism metaphor and more like a clunky like LGBT metaphor, since the negative view of the British was like, oh, they can't help being British, but they also can't control themselves. What monsters? To which Leo explains like, oh yeah, burning is a natural drive and desire for us, but it's not inherently harmful. Versus Cray, who hides his British identity while also convincing himself that he is a better exception because he's so willing to, quote unquote, control himself to the detriment of other people. So there's a lot of learning to be more accepting of burnish and realizing the flames can be good and helpful. And it's nice that the fire is used to save the world in the end instead of destroying it. And the whole aliens thing was kind of neat, not gonna lie, but it feels a little weird and a little sad for them to lose something that's a big part of their identity. However, on the other hand, I always think it's interesting when there are permanent, irreversible changes at the end of the story that you can't go back, because I like how it gives a sense of finality. And there was definitely a sense of, there's no going back now. Like, it's not like returning to the way it was before. And like everything, it could easily have been presented as like a depressing or dark ending, but instead it was framed as like being the start of a new world, or one that's uncertain and full of challenges, but full of possibility, and one where hopefully people can deal with their issues and build something better. In some ways, we, the audience, are like Leo, and we're feeling a little resigned and exhausted from being put through the ringer of the world, but we're also faced by Gallo's outrageously aggressive optimism and love, and it might be stupid, it might be unrealistic, but hey, it's completely sincere and true, and I don't think that's something to scoff at. Because sometimes you need a story where you get to save the world with the power of love, and I really like that. And for a last thought, I'll say that I don't want to get too fake deep and be like, oh, this is super special and subversive, unlike anything else, because I don't want to say that. But on a personal level, I really like the way this movie used masculinity. The creators have said in interviews that they wanted to give the movie a really manly feeling, and I definitely got that because it's all about action and robots and boys fighting. So it really explodes with manly confidence all throughout, but it didn't have a sense of masculine insecurity I feel like I get from other media, because Gallo is brash and he's confident and he has a lot of swagger, but his confidence isn't really based on belittling women or aggressively comparing himself with other men, because he's already comfortable with who he is. Like, he wants to get better, and he has aspirations, but he knows who he is, and he's comfortable with that. And also, Leo is a man who is more androgynous and a bit more gender nonconforming, but his androgyny isn't something that is mocked or used against him. Even when he and Gallo are enemies, they have a respect for each other, and it doesn't like turn into Gallo mocking Leo for, oh, he looks like a girl, or something like that. Like, the story exudes like this masculinity, but it's based on support, mutual understanding, admitting you can be wrong, being honest and unashamed of passion and emotion, which is the opposite of someone like Cray, who his own toxic insecurity and presumptuous savior complex is his downfall. And he's kind of someone who in another type of movie would be the hero, because he's the one making like, oh, the hard decision, like having to have this tortured soul and stuff. But no, he's the villain of the story, and it just seems really neat to me, because I feel like in a lot of different media, you'd have someone like Cray be the hero, who's like the very like manly politician guy who has a tortured soul but wants to do the best, what he thinks is the best for humanity, while someone who's usually a little bit more like feminine or queer-coded, like Leo, who has like the dangerous terrorist agenda, would be the unironic villain. And it doesn't do that, and it just feels kind of nice. And also, like, there's a little bit of fan service, but it's very minor, and the female characters just felt, even though they're minor, it didn't feel like they were being like objectified. They felt like real people who had relevance to the plot and who like were respected by the characters. I don't know, just watching it, as a girl, as a woman, and being able to watch something like this come out and not feel like gross and kind of weird about it, like, that's a big thing for me. Anyway, if you've seen it already, see it again if you can, or if you haven't, and if you're watching this video full of spoilers, I really hope you'll be able to watch it sometime. Shout out to everybody, like, just not in the US or Japan. Because I know that there's the Redux event going on December 8th and 10th in the United States, and it's going to be available on DVD in February in 2020. And also, it kind of might be nominated for an Oscar, which I'm still like, all right. Hopefully, if that happens, then we'll get to see it in other countries and stuff, because it's really good. I think a lot of people would like it. Another thing I would say is that it feels very, very good in all ages. Like maybe PG-13 for the action, but there's not really a lot of blood. It's not really overly sexual. Like, it does have a lot of horny energy, but it's not like uncomfortable horny energy. Like you could take, your kids to see it, like just like any Marvel movie, basically, except better. Yeah, I really like this movie a lot. I want to see it again. I'm in love with the style. I'm in love with Leo's giant robot form. It just looks really good. And I don't know, it just touched me emotionally. And even for all its flaws, it's something that I think it's going to stay with me for a while, and I'll think of fondly. So anyway, I kind of hate YouTube, but I also love Promare, so I felt the need to just ramble because writing was kind of hard. So.
So spend some time with me.